For a more concise record, we will create a separate function for working with light and shadows. In fact, you could define this function as a method of the newly created object. But you have to write keyword this 50 times. The function will build a circle. It will have two parameters. The current cursor position will be passed as arguments. Using this data, we will first fill the circle with a radial gradient and then add a shadow. To build a radial gradient, we need this point here. Its coordinates will determine the coordinates of the center of the first and second circle of the radial gradient. When the cursor is positioned at the center of our circle, the radial gradient also starts from that center. At this point, the coordinates of the center of the first and second circles coincide with the coordinates of the center of our main circle and coincide with the middle of the browser window. We will track the position of the cursor. For calculations, we use a right-angled triangle. First, we determine the cursor offsets from the center along the x and y axis and write these values into separate variables. Now we calculate the distance to the cursor. This is the hypotenuse of the triangle, the length of which is equal to the square root of the sum of the squares of the legs. We have already calculated the legs. We will use this value as the denominator, so I added 0.1 to avoid zero errors. Well, now our main goal. Take a look at the drawing. These are the displacements themselves along the corresponding axis. They will determine the radial gradient for the current position of the mouse cursor. I picked up a formula that provides a good visual. In other words, it deceives the eyesight very well. The essence is quite simple. This is the ratio of the length of the leg to the square of the hypotenuse. The result is multiplied by a small factor. This is the height of the browser window divided by 100. Similarly for dy. That's all the calculations. Clear canvas. Now we draw a circle, centered in the middle of the window. The radius is equal to the height of the window divided by 3.5. Now, let's create a gradient. The create radial gradient method creates a radial gradient using the coordinates and sizes of two circles. We have already calculated the shifts along the corresponding axis from the center of the circle. It's these values that will determine the centers of the two circles needed to build the radial gradient. The radius of the inner circle will be 0. The center of the outer circle is the same as that of the inner one. The radius of the second circle is equal to the radius of our 3D ball. Our gradient makes a smooth transition from white to black. Therefore, we need to set two color points using the addColorStop method. The method parameters are offset. This is the position of the color stop. 0 represents the beginning of the gradient and the color. And for the second color point, 1 represents the end of the gradient. We have the ability to set any number of stop colors by specifying an offset between 0 and 1. Now use the created gradient as a fill. It remains to deal with the shadow. We first use this method to determine the color of the shadow. Now let's specify the degree of blur. And finally, the shadow offset horizontally and vertically. As you can see by the minus sign, the shadow moves in the opposite direction from the light. Let's apply our fill. Almost everything is ready. It remains to initialize the canvas and call the function that we created. Upon completion of the download, We will perform initialization and build the initial state of our 3D ball. As arguments, we will pass the center of the browser window. Well, interactivity itself. We will track the movement of the mouse and call our function, passing the cursor coordinates through its parameters. Perfect mastery of the art of transmitting lights and shadow is a key point in depicting three-dimensional objects. And with that, the lesson came to an end. In the next lesson, we look at animating a linear gradient.